Hello everyone, welcome back to your video on how to study for the RC 310 course. Today in this video, we're going to be covering the information on the types of questions you'll find in this course, as well as how to actually use different skills that you need to answer different types of questions. Now, in part one of these video series, we actually had a look at inference questions as well as some short passage questions. Now, in today's video, we're actually going to be looking at the true and false questions as well as some gapped text style questions. And don't forget to tune in to part 3 to look at the remaining question styles. Okay, so in this video, the first question type we're going to be looking at is our true and false questions. So for these questions, we're going to be reading a short passage, and this could be a descriptive passage or it could also be some dialogue between a couple of people. Now, these questions are actually going to be fictional or literary passages rather than the factual passages we saw in the previous video. And in these questions, we're going to be tasked on reading the passage. Then we're going to be deciding whether information from that passage is explicitly true, false, or inferred. So what that means is that by inferred statements, they're not actually going to be directly told to you in the question, which means that we have to pick up contextual clues and hints from reading in between the lines of the passage to see what is being suggested to us. So the way we solve these questions is that we really need to pay attention to what is being implied to us in between the lines, particularly with dialogue conversations or descriptions of actions. Then, once we read between the lines, we're going to see what it's trying to tell us and finally use that information to generate our own understanding of what's going on in the passage. So those are the main critical 3 steps we're going to be using in these questions. Alright, so here in the screen we see a sample question for our true and false questions. So let's start off by reading the question. "I can't defend you," said the lawyer. "Please take your case elsewhere." "What do you mean you can't defend me?" shouted the man. "You're supposed to be good at getting people out of trouble." "Yes, I'm good at getting people out of trouble, but you're in a little too much trouble," answered the lawyer. "Wait a second," said the man angrily. "I'll pay you well. This is an outrage. You're supposed to be on my side." "I can't take your case," repeated the lawyer. "You'll undoubtedly lose in court. I don't like to lose." Okay, so basically we're going to take this passage and we're going to see if these statements here are true, false, or inferred statements taken from the passage. So again, remembering the steps we're taking, the steps we're going to be using is that we're going to understand what the text is trying to tell us in between the lines. So our first step would basically be to figure out the main topic, which we can tell is an exchange between the lawyer and a defendant, or a man who wants to be a defendant but clearly isn't getting his way. Now, the second step would be to figure out what is being hinted at. So when we read this exchange, the defendant we see becomes increasingly desperate and really wants this lawyer on his side. But the lawyer seems to not want to take the case at all. Then the final step would be to identify the inferences that we can make based on what we've just read. So we know that the defendant is feeling quite desperate. So we can tell that he's clearly done something quite terrible, where we see in the question it says he's in a little too much trouble. And the lawyer, let's think about why the lawyer actually refused to take the case, even though he was given a lot of money to be on his side. So why did he do that? Now, the reason why isn't told to us in the question, but we can read in between the lines to see why. Okay, so now that we've analysed this passage, let's take a look at these statements. We're going to be assigning true, false, or inferred to these statements here. The first statement says the man was willing to pay the lawyer well. Now, the text, we can actually quote the exact statement that tells us that he was. He says, "I'll pay you well." So since we directly found example of the man willing to pay the lawyer, well, this is actually going to be true. Then the second statement says preliminary evidence received by the lawyer had confirmed the man's guilt. Now, in this passage, was there anything about confirming guilt? No, there wasn't. However, we do read about why the lawyer actually didn't want to be part of this case. And the fact is, he says, or he reckons, this man is in a little too much trouble, even if he's good at getting people out of trouble. So even though it's not directly told us, we can make the conclusion that this man is probably guilty and there's just no way you can actually help him, which is why this is going to be an inference. Hopefully you can see the difference between statement B, which was inferred, and statement A, which was directly true. Now, option C, did the lawyer tell the man to come back another day? Well, no, he said that he doesn't want to be involved at all. So this would actually be a false statement. And finally, option D says the lawyer decided to take the case. Now, that's clearly not true as well. We already saw that the lawyer doesn't want to be involved at all. So this would also be false as well. Okay, so that organizes all of the statements, true, false, or inferred, and is basically how you approach these questions. Okay, so the next question type that we're going to be looking at is called gapped text. And gapped text is basically a closed passage, but we're going to be dealing with a much longer passage, and it's going to be around a page of reading or so. And this can again be factual or it can be literary. And the task that we are going to be doing with gapped text questions is that there's actually going to be 6 missing questions throughout that page of writing that we read. So we're going to be trying to use a bank full of answer options and then seeing which one of those best fits into the blank space. So you might see that there's a lot of overlap in the skills that we need to use between gap texts as well as the earlier fill in the blanks type questions we saw in part 1. So the steps required are that we actually need to understand what the overall main topic of the passage we read is. And we can do that by looking at the themes, the characters, or the people that appear in the passage, as well as what it actually focuses on. Then we can see that this passage is actually divided into different sections, usually through the use of paragraphs, which each focus on different sections. And that's going to be the biggest clue as to what the blank space should actually be talking about. And the third step is, again, very similar to our previous question type, where we look at what is just before and after the blank space to get the important contextual clues and hints as to what that blank space should be talking about. Okay, so on the screen we see an example question for our gapped text style of question. So we can see that on the page, the passage that we have to read is actually much, much longer than the other question passages that we had to read in the past. And we can also see the gaps present in the text. And we can see that we're actually going to be filling them up with the answer options here in the box on the right. Now, the very first question is present in the very first paragraph. And if you'll remember from the steps that we need to take to answer these styles of questions, the first step was to actually identify what the main topic of the entire text is. And from reading this page, we can see that it's going to be all about a girl called Jenny and her family who actually use their dogs, specially bred dogs, to go sleighing in the snow. Now, with that in mind, we also know that the paragraphs, or the purpose of paragraphs in general, is to organize independent ideas into a nice group of words so that we can read texts much easier and more fluently. So using that information, we can take a look at this first paragraph to see what the answer for this first question is going to be. So reading the first paragraph, it says, young Jenny Hutchins is a musher. Blank. It is someone who races sleds in the snow. It is one of the most unusual and exciting sports in North America. All of Jenny's family enjoys dogs and sledding. Her parents make the slim, beautiful sleds and also help to train the dogs. Jenny and her brother Nathan were getting ready for a race, and when someone from the Hutchins family races, everyone goes. Okay, so basically the main idea of this passage was explaining what a musher actually is. And we also see that this is basically an introduction on what the entire text is going to be. So we know that it's going to focus on Jenny's family, it's going to focus on them sledding, and it's going to be all about their experience. So this first sentence, this first blank, has to be an introductory sentence based on what we read just before the blank and just after the blank, as well as the overall main idea of the paragraph as a whole. So we need to look for an answer option that is introductory, explaining what a musher is, and that would be option B, saying no, that's not someone who likes a strange kind of breakfast cereal, because that would relate to the word musher. So the correct answer for this question would be option B. Then, for the next blank, we need to read the second paragraph. This one says, on the day of the race, the Hutchinsons get up early. Blank. The two children are junior sled racers. Because the rules for these young racers say they must train the dogs that they race, both Jenny and Nathan are especially close to their dogs. Someday, those dogs will be the lead dogs in a team. Okay, so in this paragraph, the main idea seems to be what the Hutchinsons do to actually get ready for a race. So this passage is all about the routine they take, and they wake up early and they get the dogs ready and trained. So the blank here has to be focused on those main ideas. The Hutchinsons getting up early to get the dogs prepped, and it should also focus on the two children, Jenny and Nathan, and their bond with their dogs. So if we take a look at the available answer options, the only one that fits this definition is going to be option D, which says by the time the sun comes up, so when they get up early, the dogs are barking and Jenny and Nathan give them special hugs. So once again, the relationship between Jenny, Nathan and the dogs are explained. So we can circle option D as the correct answer. Now, the next blank is in the next paragraph. So once again, reading the paragraph, it says, right after breakfast, Jenny's father and older brother, Willie, put the sleds into a trailer hooked to the car. Next, they put the dogs' harnesses in as well. Then we have a blank at the very end of the paragraph. So this paragraph was all about the preparation for just before the race. So we look at the packing and loading sequences of the family, where the father and brother put the sleds into the trailer. Then the sentence just before the blank talks about what the dogs do, which involve them being put into their harnesses. So the correct answer for the blank here should talk about what Jenny's dog is actually going to be doing for the preparation process to go to the race. So looking at the answer options, the only one that does this is going to be option G, which says, while all this is going on, Jenny loads the Siberian Huskies into the trailer where each dog has its own special spot. So circling option G as the correct answer. The next blank is a couple of paragraphs below the previous one. So the two paragraphs above it briefly talk about getting to the race and signing up. And for the actual blank paragraph, it says, when everything is set, Jenny moves to the starting line. We have the blank, and it says the judges use stopwatches to time each racer from the starting line to the finish line, and the race covers about 1.5 miles. So clearly, in this passage, the main idea is what actually is involved with the race. So we've got the judges and how they actually cover the race, and we actually are told some other details about the actual race as well. So we also know that the paragraph should focus on Jenny's race as well because of this word just before the blank. So if you take a look at the answer options, the one that is most within the context of describing how the race actually works is going to be option A, which tells us that the racers do not leave all at once but one at a time. Okay, the next blank is again skipping a paragraph that talks about the beginning of Jenny's race, and this paragraph says, as Frosty and Jenny charge over the snow, Jenny can tell that she's making good time. Zooming around the corner, she digs a heel into the snow to slow the sled. We have the blank here, and it says there is no need to tell Frosty to go faster. The dog just loves to run, even pulling the sled and the rider. Okay, so this is clearly during the race, and we're told all about Jenny's racing techniques. She can dig a heel into the snow to slow the sled, and then we are told how she goes faster. And the fact is that the dog just likes to run fast anyways, so she is going to be zooming along the snow. So the answer option that's correct should be talking about Jenny's techniques during the race, and probably something about the change in speed as well, since she starts slow here and then goes faster in the next sentence. So the correct answer option is going to be option F, which tells us that once the sled rounds the corner, Jenny lifts her heel and the sled jumps forward again in speed. So option F is the correct answer. Okay, so for the last question and paragraph, it says, at last the finish line is in sight. Blank. An hour later, she hears the news. She has finished second and Nathan has finished third. It has been a good day for the Hutchins family. Now that Jenny and Nathan's race is over, everyone goes to work to make sure that Willie is ready for his upcoming race. So in this passage, it talks about the finish line and how she actually hears the news. So clearly, this blank has to talk about the end of Jenny's race. And it should also obviously focus on Jenny as well, since the rest of the paragraph talks about what happens to the rest of the family once the focus from Jenny is now moved. So the only answer option that does this is going to be option C, which says, as they cross the finish line, Jenny wonders whether she and Frosty have won. So clocking in option C as the final answer for this question. Okay, so hopefully we've got an idea on how to tackle the true and false questions and gap text questions using the techniques we learned about in this video. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you very soon in part 3.